to the results of the Congress of the Chinese Communist Party, what can we expect from the Chinese policy in today's challenging global environment? And also we would like to analyze a little bit more what are China's interests in the global economy and on the field of regional and global security. Now let me to introduce you to our speakers today. The keynote speech will be given by Professor Dr. Wang Yiwei, who is a Jean Monnet Chair Professor and also Vice President of the Academy of Xi Jinping Thought on Socialism with Chinese Characteristic for a New Era, but at the same time Director of the Institute of International Affairs at the Renmin University and also the head of the Center for EU Studies at the Renmin University. Professor, welcome here. And our commentator who will then also talk about this situation, how we see it, Dr. András Bartók, who is assistant professor at the Public Services University in Budapest. Now, we can also see some special guests and very welcome in the Zoom room. We have also students from China, the students of the professor, but we have the distinguished Professor Vlad Vernigora, who is the Vice Rector of the Kazar University in Azerbaijan, and he is a specialist in Asia-Pacific studies. As well, my distinguished former colleague, Mrs. Barbara Maronkova, who is from NATO Public Diplomacy Division, and she is dealing with the Asia-Pacific region and in this context also with relations with China. So I would like just to tell you how we will structure our discussion. We will start the discussion with a keynote address by Professor Wang, about 10-15 minutes, if you agree, Professor, followed by the comments of Dr. Bartók, and then we will open the floor for questions and answers. Those who are together with us in the Zoom room, they have the opportunity to ask and comment directly. Those who are following us on Facebook event can put their questions or remarks in the comment section, and my colleague will forward to me and I will raise it in the framework of this discussion. Now, I think that we are in a very special situation now, because this is one thing that a few weeks ago we had the Chinese Communist Party's Congress, but also yesterday we had a very important meeting of Joe Biden and the Chinese President Xi Jinping. And I think that the whole world was very carefully looking at this discussion. In a recent interview, I heard Henry Kissinger, who highlighted the importance of understanding China. And also some other professor mentioned that Chinese people, Japanese people, understand the West much better than we understand their civilization and their culture. So I think that it is really important that we see what are the values, what are the thoughts, and the interests behind the Chinese politics. Kissinger also said that one could not eliminate the Chinese problem, so therefore one has to find a way of living with China. And I think this is an absolutely key issue. We have to find a way, how can we live with China without major conflict and confrontation, despite the fact that we are competitors. Now, Martin Jacques, a British journalist and academic, mentioned recently that in 2050, China will be the largest economy, and we will face a situation when first time in the modern history, there will be a developing country, which will be the largest economy, and the dominant country will be not Western, by an Eastern country. We have to be prepared for those considerable changes. Now, as I mentioned yesterday, we had an important meeting. We could see an important meeting between Joe Biden and President Xi Jinping. And already from the results of this discussion, we could see that in many issues, there are basic differences in our opinions and how we see the world, like issues of technology and trade, human rights, the issue of Taiwan. But the good news was that the presidents could agree to keep open the communication lines, and also they could agree that the two worlds, the West and the East, and China, United States, China, and Europe, could work together on climate change, on health and food security. Now, I don't want to tell more in my introductory words. I would like to pass the floor to the professor. Dear professor, how can you describe to us China's interest and role in this fast changing and challenging global environment?
Thank you for my dear friend in Brussels. We work very well and understand also a lot from you about NATO. And when I come back, I editor-in-chief of the 10 volumes of the NATO studies in China. So I have two titles, as you mentioned, Yao Meng Chair and Xi Jinping Thought on Socialism and Chinese Characteristics. So which remind me that my job is to connect West and the East, the father of Europe, and now I think the new era is China's strong leader, Xi Jinping. When I was a student, I learned English. There's a very famous one called Karl Marx. When he was 63 years old, or some 60 years old, he began to learn English. And he reminded to learn a foreign language, you should forget your native language. If you always want to compare German, your native language, with English, and make you confused. If you read the Communist Party 20-party Congress report, because of the different language, so it's easy to be confused, like the great struggle. What does it mean, great struggle? The self-reform or even self-revolution, the regeneration of the Chinese nation. We confused people, even Communist Party itself, because in China, the party is not your understanding of the party. Party is part, it's not for the whole. In China, the Communist Party represents the whole Chinese people's interests. All the Chinese nations, we have 56 ethnic groups. They don't have the private or personal interests for the Communist Party. So it's not a party, actually. I would like to suggest to change the translation in a Chinese pinyin. It's the Gongchandang of China. It's not the Communist Party of China. It's not your Communist Party, not the Soviet Union's style. So we confused, maybe you, so to understand the Communist Party from the party meaning. So very important. This time, with the theme of the Communist Party 20-party Congress is the Chinese modernization to achieve the greater regeneration of the Chinese nation. They didn't use the modernization with Chinese characteristics. Before we use that to show we are different with the Soviet Union. Soviet Union collapse, we are survival. You know, the 1960s, they are earlier, there are dispute between Mao and Khrushchev, and after Stalin died. I tell you a story when Khrushchev visited China in 1958. It's a secret visit, actually. When he came back, China make an announcement. Khrushchev visit China and have a joint statement. Later, 2 weeks later, I think, and then China began to fight against the Chiang Kai-shek's ship Taiwan. And everybody think about this is coordination between China and the Soviet Union. We didn't mention anything about the operation, military operation in the Taiwan Strait. And then Khrushchev very angry about that. So now similar things happened to China. Everybody think about President Putin visit China during the Winter Olympic Games. They definitely told President Xi about the special military operation. But actually, of course, they didn't tell, because Russia is self-confident, can manage this. The thing about they can finish the war with 3 days. Actually, they don't think they needed the help from China at the beginning. So that's the I mentioned this history to tell you China is not Soviet Union. Soviet Union is a Karl Marxism with Russians culture or Orthodox or even Slav or whatever. China now President Xi's new era means put the Karl Marxism to have the synergy and to adapt the context with the Chinese 5,000 years civilization. Maybe you are very confused. How can Karl Marx match Chinese traditional culture? For basically 3 reasons. Traditional Chinese culture don't believe a single God. We have the Buddhism, Taoism, Confucianism, and Karl Marx don't believe any God. So that's match the secular society of China. Secondly, Karl Marxism want to people, the service for the people, working class. China also, we say people first, people centric, traditionally cultural. And also Karl Marxism match Chinese dialects, philosopher, yin and yang, I'd say dialects. So what we talk about the Karl Marxism is Chinese-ized, China-ized. It's not your understanding of Karl Marxism. It's very interesting. Today's 21st century Karl Marxism is Xi Jinping's thought on socialism with the Chinese characteristics. But we still use it with that, maybe in the future, Xi Jinping's thought in a more precise. Okay, so this is, I think, very important. Chinese civilization is very inclusive. We are not against either you on our side or against you. It's black and white scenario. It's not the case. So President Xi told President Biden in Bali yesterday, said democracy is all countries' actually core values. It's the universal. It's but you have your style of democracy. I have my style. We should learn from each other, but you cannot say you are different with me and then you are not democracy or autocracy. It's like you eat, you chop steak, you eat, use knife and fork, but we are eating. That's the most important. The eating way differences is not means you are different people. We are human beings. So that's very important. So that's the reason Soviet Union, the US, the Cold War scenario cannot repeat in China and the US, because the Soviet Union still claim their third Rome Empire. The first, they have the actually similar ideology. China is, we don't think we are empire, we are Rome Empire also. So it's more inclusive. I think that's very important. So we say use the regeneration of the Chinese nation. I think this is a more civilization understanding of China's behavior. You said was the China's pursuit in the international system. So President Xi Jinping put forward a committee of the shared future for the humankind. That means whatever reason you are, capitalism, socialism, whatever religion you, whatever belief, or you don't believe any God or believe different gods, doesn't matter. We are all human beings, live on the same planet. So we should work together. So that's most inclusive thinking. It's very important. Otherwise, the world will be divided. Again, repeat the tragedy, clash of civilization, or the Red Cross crucial, whatever. So I think basically the signals, the 20-party Congress report is that we seek the Chinese modernization. We're also modernization, but it's Chinese style. We learn a lot from the West modernization, but we go beyond, because the Western modernization, the history, actually they colonized the world, the war, the sacrifice for others actually. But now we need to seek our own way. As I said in my story, my family story, Chinese people very poor in my childhood period, student period. We are not fit up of ourselves. So the farmers sacrifice for the industrialization, sacrifice the human beings, you said, and but for the long-term interests. So that's the reason Chinese modernization piece is inclusive. But we are learn Buddhism from Asia and India, but never source our religion to outside the world. So we think about we can enjoy the beauty of your beauty and enjoy your beauty as my beauty. Beauty together is a great harmony. So that's I think the philosopher. So different countries, they have different modernization paths, and the China path to the modernization is we can share some experience, but we will never sell our model to outside, because you don't have the strong leadership of Communist Party. You are not like 5,000 years civilization. We are different national condition. So that's basically I think the Communist Party's report basically sent to the outside world. So what seek China? China seek the people. We say serve to the people. The majority of the people, 85%, live in the developing country, but they suffered a lot from the pandemic to the global inflation and energy crisis. If they cannot have the chance to improve their life, if they are still suffered with the extremely in the globalization, they can make more refugees and even war to the world. So I think that's the reason China's people-centric globalization initiative, I think is a makeup to the capital-driven globalization. So that's basically the Chinese foreign policy philosopher for President Xi. So I basically to introduce that, and then I would like to answer more your questions and comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor, for this very interesting introductory remark. And I would like to pass the floor to Professor Bartók to make his comments.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor, for your deep insights and insightful remarks. And I would like to thank ICDT for organizing this event. It's a very rare and interesting opportunity to share ideas with colleagues from China, especially convenient now that we can have this online infrastructure for it. Professor, I am very curious about your opinion on a couple of matters. And I'm going to abuse my role as commentator and questioner to steer the conversation a bit closer to my own research expertise and research field, which to me it's military security in the Asia Pacific. So I deal with larger statistical trends in the number of weapon systems and how this might give some insight to the structure of security in East Asia. And in the last couple of months, on multiple occasions, at least here in Europe, we have been very much involved on discussions regarding the increasing military capabilities of East Asian powers and East Asian actors. Of course, in the forefront, we talk about, we are interested in, we are, just as academics, we are fascinated by, for example, the growing naval capabilities of China, just the sheer tempo of ship making. I think it's all inspiring to watch. Like it's very interesting to watch, and it's very astounding to watch the sheer tempo of it. But there are other regional actors, of course, increasing their military capabilities. And I was wondering, as you've mentioned, how there are Chinese perceptions and Chinese takes on world order, on modernization. I have the feeling that in most cases, in European public opinions or European public perceptions, we look at changing military capabilities as something of a destabilizing factor. And of course, just from a simple way of looking at it, it could be. But you know, when changing capabilities are transparent and both sides know about each other's capabilities, we arrive to the mechanism we refer to as deterrence. So deterring the other side from transgressing lines or escalating the status quo. I was wondering if you can tell us a little bit about how might Chinese perceptions, are they necessarily different on deterrence and looking at the role of military power in the international system? Is a general Chinese perception on the changing military structure of the international sphere pessimistic, optimistic, or how do they view, like, having transparent information about changing capabilities? Do they view the structure as tending towards an equilibrium, a balance of power? We have our own tradition of relying on narratives of balance of power here in Europe. I was wondering how Chinese perceptions might relate to this idea of balance of power, and how do they view changes in day-to-day capabilities? How do they relate to balance of power narratives within either the Chinese political discourse or just general public discourse?
Thank you. And my PhD dissertation topic is about the balance of power. So you ask a good question for me. Again, we should back to the Chinese philosopher. As I said, in modern time, we learn a lot from Europe, and in the 20th century, we learn a lot from US. But the traditional Chinese cultural DNA is different with the West. We don't think the man is evil. Character features is evil, so power is evil. So you need to check and balance domestically and have different parties and internationally with the balance of power. We don't think that kind of logic. To understand China, for instance, if you read Lao Tzu, it's the harmony between the man and the nature. Under the heaven, there are different gods. As I mentioned, Buddhist, Taoist, Confucius, but it's different God like you. The different gods learn from each other. That's reason we have 5,000 years civilization. But in the West, it's one God. If you read the Bible, the God created the heaven and then the earth. Then later created with the mud, created the man, and then from the rib of the man created the woman, right? So that's a narrative different with China. So we say under the heaven different gods, but you said God created the man. So that's the reason the first sentence of the Universal Declaration on Human Rights in 1947, originally drafted by the Americans, said that all the men and women are created equal. And Zhang Panchun, the former president of Nankai University, who was appointed as the vice president of the draft community, changed this, are born in equal, not created. So that's basically a different philosophy of that. We think about the world is if you build more military, more arms, and then others as well, it's escalate of the arms race, it's caused more danger. So the best way, if we read the Sun Tzu, the classic of the art of war, the best way is to win the war without fighting. It's not do as you do similar things. I think the most important people's heart trust each other. If you view of others as your brotherhood, it's a view of like one family. Do you need to build more military when you're a brother grown up? So that's very important. So traditional Chinese thinking is all on the heaven, they are one family. That's all inclusive of this. This is very important. But many European may be confused why 2,000 years ago Confucius said it still works today. China different with you. China is like the wrong empire, still exists. Chinese civilization 5,000 years, as a united country more than 2,000 years. So everything we read from my primary school textbooks, everything song and then slogans in the street, everything still written by Confucius, by Lao Tzu. So it's in our blood, it's in our DNA. So that's reason China is different with Russia, different with US, very important. Okay, let's continue. Okay, I will brief maybe answer because okay, can you help me now? Okay,
yes.
to summarize you to answer your question. As I said, you read your Bible, you say the original sin of the people, right? So you are that's the reason you have the need a checks and balance of the power is evil. But China, we have a different story of that. So we don't think stronger. You need to check and balance. That's a reason Communist Party leadership approved by all the Chinese people. If in your scenario, you say, oh, why one party, blah blah blah. So different. Okay. So as I said, China, we have non-allies of foreign policy. We are not like the US. They have so many allies. NATO. For basically 3 reasons. One, first, all the allies, they are not equal. Are you Hungary is equal to the US under the NATO framework? No. You more rely on them to protect you, right? Keep American in. That's the very important to keep Russian out. China, we said every country is equal. We cannot somebody rely on you. It's a burden for China. Even Russians think, oh, we want to build an alliance with China. Chinese people say, no. We are not an ally. Otherwise, you do anything you like Ukraine, and then China will pay the price. So, second, we are not interfering in domestic affairs. If you are ally, you are, like the Americans, the espionage of the workers' cell phone and took like 5G you cannot use. Otherwise, I cannot control you. But China, no, we don't like it. Let it be. You enjoy yourself, not. And thirdly, if we also have the ally system, the world will be divided. Some of the U.S. ally in Europe, in Asia, will be joint Chinese ally, maybe the Philippines, for instance, and then the world will be divided. So we say, oh, U.S. alliance system is okay, but not put China as a target. Okay, so I think that's basically a different philosophy. And some people say, oh, China, you don't have any ally, and then you feel lonely. U.S. have so many, we don't have enemy. Why we need so many allies? Huh? We don't need checks and balance, as you mentioned. But Chinese built so many navy, military, because we need to protect us. We cannot rely on the U.S. to protect us. Sea, land, and energy, whatever. As I said, 130 countries, number 1 trade partner is China. So who can provide you of this trade shipping route? So China's military buildup is basically for that. And also we have a Taiwan problem. We need deterrence, Taiwan not be independent. So that's very, very important. So we are patient enough to solve the Taiwan problem with the negotiation. We are not eager to solve this problem. We are more self-confident about the future, as I mentioned. So U.S. sells the Ukraine model to Taiwan and warning the Europeans, oh, well, I don't think this will happen. China, we think, have more confidence. We can negotiate with the Taiwanese. We are the same people, same culture, speak the same language. Very important. So the separation is just temporary. In the Chinese long 2,000 years history, this is just temporary. We're not eager to solve this problem. Okay, so that's very important.
Thank you, Professor. And I really like the starting comment you said that cultural relationship to power is different. Like power is not necessarily evil. Power is power. So I think we in Europe have looking at human nature either in optimistic or pessimistic way, but nowadays it seems that because of certain trends, the pessimistic one is more prevalent. It is very refreshing to hear from other parts of the world a more optimistic view on human nature in general and relationship between human nature and power. Thank you very much for your answer to that.
Before we go further, because I know that Barbara Maronkova should leave, I would like to ask her if she has any question or comment to what the professor said.
Yeah, Yeah, thank you very much. No particular comment. As you said, we are more in a listening mode just to understand a little bit better the positions and the thinking. So absolutely delightful to be able to listen to the professor and his views. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Barbara.
And I'm very happy, as I mentioned, my students want to start or intern in NATO or NATO Research Institute to understand each other. It's very important for China.
Thank you. Dear Professor, you mentioned Russia, you mentioned alliances, so a little bit the Chinese philosophy. And I know that for China, the sovereignty of different states is very important. And now we are in a conflict between Russia and Ukraine. And for many people, the Chinese approach, I know China is probably in a very difficult situation, but recently the Chinese foreign minister, when he had a phone call with the Russian foreign minister, said that China firmly supports Russian President Putin's government to help lead Russian people to overcome difficulties, eliminate disturbances, to realize the strategic goals of development, but never ever acknowledged actually that Russia committed an aggression against Ukraine. Now, one can translate it as a silent support of the Russian action, which is quite against the principles of state sovereignty. So how you can how you see this? How you can explain the Chinese foreign policy vis-a-vis the conflict in Ukraine?
Well, after the collapse of the Union, Ukraine independent denuclearized. P5 all guaranteed nuclear and military guaranteed security for Ukraine, right? In this regard, any single country cannot against this, particularly during the Olympic Games period. So definitely the Chinese are very actually astonished and even angry about what happened in Ukraine, because Ukraine also is a good friend of China. Our two aircraft carrier, like the engines of their some aircraft, also import from Ukraine, and many agricultural products and many. We have quite a, one of my students actually today is from Ukraine. So, but when Russia also a good friend for China, so two good friends fighting each other, it's make China difficult to take the position. Of course, the principle of the UN Charter, that's very important. Territory integrity, sovereignty. Otherwise, you know, if say the referendum in Taiwan and the Taiwan was separated from China, it also cannot accept. That's the reason we against the so-called summit for democracy, use the narrative for the democracy, autocracy, undermine the principles of the UN Charter of the sovereign state as a key unit, right? So definitely we are against any intervention of the domestic affairs, war and territory of the sovereignty. Everything should be respected. That's no problem. But Chinese views of this is more historic. When Chinese people say, "Hey, what happened in Kosovo? You bombed the embassy, you NATO." So sorry to say, that's Chinese bad impression about NATO. In Afghanistan, in Iraq, in many occasions, NATO joined, Europeans joined as well with the United States. How about their sovereignty? How about their territory integrity? So we need to respect all the sovereignty and the territory integrity, including Chinese and whatever. So this is, I think, you cannot pick up single case, blame China and that, and so that's first. And the second, I think China not supported Russia. You said silent is support. I don't think this is. You cannot say we are not join you and then against you. It's like George W. Bush said, either on my side after September 11th or on the terrorist side. This is not this dichotomy or the black and white scenario is not the case. China not supported we said Russia special military operation, we don't support that. We said very clearly, we should respect sovereignty and territory integrity of any country, including Ukraine, of course, including Russia. Many Russians' territory integrity also should be respected. This is for all the principles of the United Nations. So, but we not openly condemn, you say, Russia's behavior. Again, this is a Chinese culture. As a friend, as I mentioned to you, President Putin visit Beijing and then have the operation military without actually consulting and told China side before. But we cannot openly say, we're angry, Putin, you are cheating my as a friend. We cannot say openly as a friend. Usually Chinese people solve this problem is polite to remind you next time you cannot do that, and I'm angry, but not openly to say that. It's like you see Chinese from the different levels of officials, even including academics, about 20-party Congress report, is similar expression. But you say, oh, this is no democracy, no freedom of speech. No, we have so many disputes, but close the door, consultation, negotiation. But when you open the door to the public, you should, if you have dispute different, like the Trump and Occupy the Capitol Hill, this is loose face. So this is China style, I think. China use our leverage to influence Russia. Can you see in a SCO summit, right? President Xi openly criticized President Putin, and also in the UN voting, we are not a supporter of Russia, for the 4 states of the independence, right? A referendum after referendum. So I think that's most important. And we're not just openly, if China also join you sanctions and condemn Russia and put Russia to the extreme, and then maybe it's more difficult to, in the future, to be the honest broker to build the connection and a bridge to end this war. I think China say very clearly, when the Chancellor Schulz visit China 1 week earlier, President Xi said there's no nuclear, we cannot allow any nuclear war or nuclear weapons of the risks in the Eurasia continent, including Korean Peninsula and Ukraine. I think that's very clearly. Otherwise, people worry about the nuclear war. Seems the Cuba crisis never happened like that kind of difficulty. We need peace. We need open and reform. We always ask North Korea and Russia to maybe share some experience from China, opening reform, make the Chinese economy strong. But you are still rely on the traditional energy. North Korea still closed. It's not good, not self-confidence. But we cannot enforce them to do. We just persuade and in Chinese approach and the Chinese way. So please understand of the Chinese culture.
Thank you, dear professor. I would like to open the floor for other questions and comments if those who are in the Zoom room would have some questions or comments. Maybe, sir, yes, Mr. Bartók.
I just wanted to add a comment because I wanted to pose the question if whether or not China looks at the example of North Korea and sanctions regimes against North Korea as an analogy for how Russia should be treated, or why Russia should not be completely isolated. And I think the professor alluded very elegantly to this this perception that maybe the way North Korea was being persuaded was not as productive as we would have hoped, and maybe let's not commit the same mistake again with Russia. It was very interesting, and thank you, Professor, for sharing those thoughts. I'm happy to hear these perspectives on it. Would you say that I was just wondering if this example of North Korea, this approach to Russia, I was just wondering if you can share 1 or 2 thoughts about another issue which is also often discussed now here in this part of the world, about Iran. I was wondering if you have any opinions or takes on the way perhaps the outside world tries to engage with Iran. Do you have any specific perceptions on for example, the JCPOA, the nuclear deal with Iran, and how might a different approach than the current one, maybe a more engaging one, might be more productive regarding the Iran issue? So can we draw some sort of a trilateral connection of ideas between sanction regimes on North Korea, the Russian sanction regime, and maybe the Iranian issue?
Well, you treated me as the spokesman of foreign affairs of China. Okay, I try my perspective. North Korea, Russia are different. You cannot say sanctions to North Korea regime. You cannot say that. China joined the sanctions with the UN resolution against the North Korea non-proliferation and the missiles launch. So it's a behavioral activities, not a sanction to the regime. Okay, you can also not sanction to Putin or regime or government. You say now the Chinese very disappointed. Actually, the world also disappointed. You are not sanctioned to Putin himself, his people, but also Tchaikovsky and the Russians' dog. Everything in the private property, you are robbed. So we learn from you, rule of law, respect the private property, whatever, but now you're everything against. This is not good for your image, actually. And okay, about North Korea, China said very clearly against the non-proliferation. This time, many warning, President Biden raised this question to President Xi in Bali that yesterday. There's warning that so-called nuclear tests will be conducted in North Korea. China definitely against. I don't think they ever can have the nuclear test because of China's influence. So many things we do, you don't know. You know, but we can openly condemn or say something, blah, blah, blah. No, we are just very polite and quiet to remind North Korea, if you do this, we cannot, you know, call an economic, blah, blah, blah. You will have many trouble. Okay, so but now that accept. So otherwise, you know, we have one unsolved problem, another, and Ukraine, and then the Korean Peninsula is in a mess. Okay, so quite diplomacy. Chinese approach, try to understand different with the Western culture. About Iran, also about you said the non-proliferation treaty, Iran should follow. So the nuclear deal signed with the 6+1. I think China also. European Union play a very important role, and during Obama's period. But Obama later Trump say, "Oh, for this is a regret to have this deal." Come on, they are not respect the multilateralism. Today, even you anything you say tomorrow, I regret, and then we renegotiate. This make Iran very regret. And also Iran said, "Why we go to nuclear?" Because you use nuclear weapons before in Japan, and also you kill Saddam Hussein, you kill Libya, Gaddafi, because they don't have nuclear weapons. So the reason North Korea and Iran go to nuclear because of you want to use nuclear weapons, and also for China, why China bombed 1964 nuclear weapons? Because the U.S. 3 times at least wanted to use nuclear weapons during the Korean War. So make China very, during the poor period, even to go nuclear. So this is a long-term consequences. It's U.S. foreign policy is not to take care of too much. It's I think different thinking model because the U.S. have the 4 years election, midterm election. They cannot like China think about the long term, like a 20-party Congress. This we think about 2035, 2049, right? 100 years from the People's Republic of China. And Martin Yack mentioned about the size of the Chinese GDP in the world map. Yes, it's normal. Chinese population is 4 times of the US. If you think about the human rights, if a per capita GDP of China reach the US level, the Chinese GDP will be 4 times of the US. That's the Chinese human rights. And then, can you imagine what had happened? US GDP is 1/3 of the world, and China will 4 times of it. So this is unacceptable. Okay. So that reason Obama said, if Chinese people dream the American dream, that we need a 3-4 planet. So we dream our own dream. That's the reason we say Chinese modernization is more inclusive, more peace, more harmony, man and nature. So we go our Chinese way. So please understand, this is people first policy result. If you really respect the human rights principle. And secondly, even GDP maybe surpass of US sooner or later, but that's natural, as I mentioned. But the logic, is still US, the West dominant rules. Like we use the computer, we use Huawei, but the software, the Android system is still US, Americans. So don't worry, we built the house on your base. So it's no decouple. It's different with Soviet Union and US relations. Okay, so we're still very humble. We're a long way to go. Our modernization, our high technology, our system. We are not want to build an alternative system for that. It's very cost so high. And Chinese culture, as I said, you play Tai Chi. Tai Chi is take use of your force. It's a harmony in the yin and yang, not box where fight against you to kill you. No, it's not so smart. I think that's the reason China can survive for 5,000 years.
Thank you very much, Professor, and thank you for insights.
Thank you for this very interesting explanation, Professor. And you mentioned human rights, and you know that in Western countries there are many criticism towards China because of human rights. You mentioned also Taiwan earlier, and there is also a delicate issue. This is the issue of Hong Kong, because China had an agreement which was built on the principle of one country, two regime, two systems. And now with the national security law in 2017, with the introduction of this law, many people think that this is a breach of this agreement, and practically the Chinese government is very much pushing Hong Kong into a more, let's say, if you read the newspapers, a more autocratic system regime that doesn't respect really this one country, two system, two regime principle. And many put it in the context of Taiwan as well. They say, yeah, but be careful, because if that would happen to Taiwan. How you see it from the Chinese political philosophical point of view? What happened in Hong Kong?
Yes, I think this is a very important wisdom, and for the one country, two systems, to solve the problem of the colonial transfer authority to China, right? And it's a model for other countries as well. One country, two systems is a Chinese initiative, which approved by the China-UK joint statement over the handover. This is international law. We respect, okay? And also we registered in the UN. That's different with the US. US now, they claim there are 3 communicas between China and the People's Republic, and the US is not the international law. They want to undermine this. No, with China never. Okay, but the problem is one China, two systems. First is one China, right? Two systems under one China principle. When Hong Kong, you visited Hong Kong or not?
Hong Kong.
Hong Kong is a hub of the intelligence of the US, and also the hub of the many transnational companies and agents and news agents, whatever, based in Hong Kong. They use this to overthrow the Communist Party's leadership. Okay, there are many cases, many, they're demonstrating in the street. The demonstration is no problem, but they want to overthrow. Then we have of course, lots of the evidence to show that the Americans, Consul General, and behind, and then all this, not violate China's national interests, Communist Party's leadership. No one can actually allow this from happening because it's Chinese territory. Okay, but the governance way needs to reform. But system is still there. They are capitalist system. They are used the Hong Kong currency, passport, the judicial system, everything is the British style, no problem. But the way of governance, of course, can adapt to the new condition. The Europeans also adapt. You have the reform of your single market, right? So it's not oh, you changed your system. No, you didn't change your system, but the governance way you reformed, you changed. So that's that case. So we are not changing the one country, two systems, not system, but the way of governance reformed to make sure Hong Kong is not a threat to the national security sovereignty of China. So that's very important.
Thank you very much. Any question or comment? Then here I have another question, and I think that would be very important in light of the Communist Party Congress, because this gave the framework of our discussion. Practically, if one looks at the Chinese economy, one could see a very considerable development, especially during the presidency of Xi Jinping. There was, he enacted economic reforms. There was a very strong economic development in China. China reduced pollution radically. We could see also a very important infrastructural project, this One Belt, One Road project, which helped to develop Chinese economic ties with the rest of the world. We could also see a more self-confident China on the field of security and military affairs in the South China Sea and elsewhere. But with the COVID, obviously everywhere, not only in China, the COVID stopped a little bit the development. And when I looked at the reaction of the international global economy on the results of the Communist Party Congress, I was surprisingly, I realized that there was a fear. So the stock market, where the Chinese stocks have fallen, the yuan, your money lost value, and so on and so forth, because seemingly the emphasis was on security and not really on economic growth. So practically the zero COVID policy frightens a little bit the investors and the economic actors. Also, the change in what international economic actors considered as the pro-reform leaders, they were changed as in leading positions. So there was a negative reaction. There was a fear. How you see now the economic context in China, the prospect of the Chinese economic development in light of the Communist Party Congress decisions?
Very good question. And if you visit China, I suggest you visit the Central Party School. Actually, Angela Merkel, when she took power, she visited and changed her mind about the Communist Party. During that time, she told the vice president during that time, Xi Jinping, saying, "Oh, I grew up in East Germany. I hate the communism, but your communism is different with East Germany. You are not a communism," because Mr. Schmidt met Deng Xiaoping also taught. Schmidt said, I found that this is not a communism actually. It's more Confucianism. Why you not change the name? Communist Party, you just change the Chinese Confucian Party. Some people even Communist Party, whatever. Why you keep the name? And Vice President Xi answered. You know what he answered? We do nothing wrong. Why we should change the name? If you are guilty, you kill people, you met them, you change your name, they register in your different IDs, right? That's bad guys always do that. We do nothing, so why we change the name? But you need to change the understanding of the Communist Party, as I mentioned. Why I say this? Because there's a very famous motto in the Central Party School. All the Chinese officials should do training there before promoted. I also promote training, the learning courses there. Their motto saying, everything in China, any small difficulties, problems, if multiple of the 1.4 billion times, is tremendous big problem. Every achievements in China, if divided as 1.4 billion people, it's nothing, it's very limited. So that's reason China's per capita GDP is only 1/6 of the US. Even our GDP, much more than the 60% of the US GDP. So that's the reason China very humble, because per capita GDP, everything divided as 1.4 billion is very small. But we'll be very careful. Any Chinese officials be very, very careful. They cannot shut down, turn off of their cell phones. They keep on for 24 hours. Like COVID, if it happened, what happened? My sister-in-law now live in outside. They cannot live at home. They're just for COVID in Inner Mongolia. So we work so hard. If you visit Xinjiang, you say this is forced labor. Yes, the forced labor of the Communist Party official. They work so hard. You force them to work, because in China, Communist Party is an unlimited company. But the US is Europeans is a limited company, right? In your turn, in your daytime. China, even you are not daytime at night or weekend, even Spring Festival, we have the Communist Party Political Bureau have the conference during Wuhan period. Okay, that's different understanding. Why we cannot do the similar COVID policy as you? The three basic reasons is first, you know how many aging people in China? How many disabled people in China? So aging people, disabled people combined together, more than 300 million. Those people cannot vaccinate because the bad health, because some problems. For instance, my father-in-law, because high pressure, they cannot vaccinate. It's danger, okay? So vaccine rate reach the maximum. We cannot do every people. So if totally open, difficult. In China, as I said, different culture, we respect the seniority, the senior. It's not like you, governor, it's like strong side, you are maritime civilization, we are agricultural civilization. So one senior connected to many families, one child policy, if you suffer the children and the seniors, lots of problem for China. Second, because China is still a developing country. Our persons of the bed in the hospital, it's just less than 1/10 of the US. So if more people, infected by the virus, we don't have enough bed, we don't have the resources, equipment to treat them. Look what happened in Wuhan. We have two special new hospital, right, to care. It's very difficult to governor of China, big, so huge, big country, and so that reason we put people first and life first, not a capital. So we should save the lives, even you are 90 years old. Lots of money with China to do that. As I myself, my son hated the test of the COVID every day, but we have to do this. We understand. So we volunteer to sacrifice our freedom and human rights for the long-term interests of the nation, and particularly during the difficult period. It's not a China, Eastern culture, Eastern Asia. Can you imagine South Korea during the Eastern Asia financial crisis? Many people think, oh, South Korea will collapse, where the economy, blah, blah, blah. But the South Korean people, the ladies, put the rent, put the everything, donated to the government, and then asked the government to save the financial market. This never happened in Europe, I think. It never happened in US. So this is, I think, the Eastern culture. Koreans, Chinese, very similar, the traditional culture. So thus, if you talk about human rights also, China says human rights is a collective rights. It's a long-term interest of the nation, not your personal, individual rights. We always say guanxi, always a relationship. So I can only be I through you. But in English, I always capital. In Chinese, I always small. Us is better, is, you know, and the whole us is China, and then all the world. It's different understanding of that. We suffered a lot for the economic, our officials work so hard. We need to change. We understand. So it's balanced. I think maybe next March or next June, latest will open. So people predicted that because now the virus is not so poison, the disease is not so hurt of the health. So our seniors, our disabled people can survive from the opening, and then we can open. Okay, so that's the reality.
Dear Professor, thank you very much for your presence. I'm very sorry that we had this technical problem in the middle of our conversation, but it was really very interesting. I see that we have more questions also coming from people from Facebook event concerning human rights issues, UN, and so on and so forth. But the problem is that our time is over, and we don't want to abuse your time and your kindness to talk to us. I hope we can continue the discussions with you, because that's very interesting to understand the thinking of Chinese people and the culture of Chinese people. It's very important for understanding what is doing China and why. So I would like once again to thank you. I would like to thank Professor Bartók also for the comments and questions, and to all other participants for their active participation. And hopefully see you next time.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
And we're happy to learn more from you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor.
Bye.
Thank you, Zsolt.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.